Hello again. This is the third panel of today. And now we had keynote speakers delineating the importance of security sector reform at the first panel. At the second panel, we focused on what should be done in terms of security sector. And this panel will scrutinize exactly the challenges, probable challenges or existing challenges. Because once you start a security sector reformation, that means somebody will be harmed or will benefit. That means it's a matter of competition in another way. And if Libya's current structure in terms of social, cultural, political, and armed groups, armed factions, and external incursions, then it will be much more complicated. Everybody will want to have a hand inside. So we will discuss what these challenges are. And I have really distinguished guests today in this panel, and I would like to introduce you first. The first guest who will contribute this is Mr. Jumal Gamati. Jumal Gamati is the special envoy of GNA's Prime Minister Serraj to Maghreb countries and head of Tagir political party in Libya. Another distinguished guest is Salah El-Bakush, a very experienced and Libyan political analyst, and at the meantime, former advisor to the High Council of Libya State. And finally, we have third distinguished guest from the United States with Libya descent, Hafed El-Gouel. He is senior fellow at the Foreign Policy Institute of the Paul H. Nitze School of Advanced International Studies at Johns Hopkins University. I wish I sounded correctly, your names and institutions. So the first question goes to Mr. Jumal Gamati. You are really blended with the realities of Libya, politics in Libya, security sector reform, and many other issues that I can't imagine. So for a security sector reform, including political ones, what challenges are waiting for us in future? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Aslan. Let me start by thanking SETA, this distinguished institution, for inviting us for this forum, and thank you as well for all the hard work and efforts you put into planning this. And it's a pleasure to be with other panelists who are my friends like Salah and Hafid. And let me say hello to everybody who's listening to us and following us out there. I think this topic is extremely important for Libya. SSR is at the heart of stabilizing Libya and building the new Libya we aspire to. 8 years ago, we should have done DDR, we should have done SSR, security sector reform, but unfortunately, that didn't happen, maybe partly because of the lack of vision and strong leadership that actually had a holistic approach to the way the new Libya should go. But never mind, I mean, even 8 years later, we can still address this, and hopefully some of the strategies and some of the ideas will find their way to be implemented in Libya. It's better to be late than never. And that brings me to my first challenge. I have about 5 challenges. The first challenge is actually to have the vision which we did not have perhaps 8 or 9 years ago. We need a specific vision for security institutions in Libya. What is the new concept of security? We need a new vision, a new concept of security that's totally different from the security the Libyan people experienced over 42 years of oppression and tyranny. So a new concept of security that is institutions which actually protect the citizens rather than violate their human rights. And this vision for security in Libya and security institution in Libya needs to be part of an overall holistic vision for Libya as a whole that includes institution building and includes state building. But let me just say a little bit more specifically about a vision for security in Libya. What do we mean by that? We mean that a new vision where the state has the exclusive monopoly to use power and force. Now, at the moment, this doesn't exist, because with almost 20 million or more pieces of arms scattered all over Libya. Everybody has arms, everybody can use force, and almost everybody is using force, some in a positive way and many in a detrimental negative way. So a new vision based on the exclusive right of the state to use the monopoly to use force and to hold arms and so on is very important. We have a long way to go, but we need to work towards that. Another aspect of this new vision for security in Libya is that the security institutions, whether it's the army, the police, or the intelligence, their main role is to protect the citizen, is to guarantee the human rights of the citizen, is to provide secure environment for the citizen. Another important role for security institutions is actually to protect the land and the borders and the sovereignty of Libya as a whole. Another aspect of their role should be is to protect the constitution and to protect democratic discourse, to protect democracy. And they should not be a role where security institutions interfere with political affairs and actually dictate to politicians who have been elected by the people to run the country. So no interference in political affairs, protecting the citizens, their rights and their security and their human rights, protecting the land and the sovereignty of Libya, and also protecting the natural resources of Libya as well, and all the wealth that Libya has. This is the new vision that we need to develop for the security institutions in Libya. This is one challenge. Another challenge I need to move on to is legislation. We have legislation for the army, for the police, for the role of the intelligence, and so many different legislations and laws that govern the security institutions. Many of these legislations need to be reviewed and need to be updated, including what's called the army law. And this needs to be addressed, hopefully, by the next parliament that we elect, hopefully in about just over 12 months. So legislation challenge is very important. Another challenge we need to address is to have a strategy for rebuilding security institutions. SSR needs a vision, but it also needs a strategy. What does that mean? That means a strategy where we have a new concept of security, where, for example, for the army, we need to have a streamlined army that is totally mechanized and that's totally mobile, that's based in strong capacity building and human capacity. We need to gradually replace the old army, which I can tell you over the last 50 years, we have officially an army of about 130,000 personnel, 17,000 of them are officers, and guess what? The average age of these officers is over 55. This is not an army. This is not acceptable. We need to gradually streamline the army, replace it with young men or women. So we need a young army, mobilized army, mechanized army that relies heavily on technology. Why? Because Libya has a very small population. It has a vast area of 1,760,000 square kilometers. It has very long land borders with 6 countries, which total 4,500 kilometers. It has a long shore on a coastal line on the sea of 2,000 kilometers. So 6,500 kilometers of borders, and this vast area, how are we going to protect it with an army? That means we're going to need 500,000 or more, which is impossible with the population of Libya. That's why the need for a streamlined, mechanized, mobile army that relies on advanced technology, the latest modern technology, and relies on strong, high capacity building. That means strong emphasis on training, education, and development of the personnel. It is not, it doesn't matter whether we have new buildings, new equipment, new logistics if you do not invest in the people. The human capital is far more important than any other capital. So that's what we mean by streamlining an army, and this is another legislation I would like to highlight. Another challenge for us is how to accommodate the irregular civilian forces, what everybody likes to call militias. First of all, we need to be careful not to demonize the majority of these young men. The majority of these young men, they are decent Libyans. They have filled a vacuum, a security vacuum over the last 10 years. They have played a crucial role in, for example, fighting ISIS or Daesh in Sirte and eradicating it. They played a crucial role in defending Tripoli against the Haftar attack and the countries behind Haftar. So to demonize the majority of them and describe them as criminals is unfair. That doesn't mean there are no criminal elements within them. Of course there are. But how do we accommodate these civilian groups in a modern, disciplined army? That is the challenge. And the challenge is actually to give them incentives. To give them incentives and also to attract them to join the army, or if others choose not to join the army, give them outlets to fulfill their ambitions in life. They are young men, they need jobs, they need hope, they need to fulfill ambitions, and the state need to facilitate and offer outlets for them to do that. And those who join the army, they need to be incentivized. Yes, they will be disciplined, they will be professional, but they need to be incentivized, for example, with good salaries. Can you believe that the salaries within the army are very, very low? That is not an incentive to attract people to join the army. Whereas some, and I say some, militia lords offer very high salaries for these young men to join the militias. This is what I mean by we need to give incentives for those young men to actually join the professional new army we're talking about. Now, these are the main challenges I wanted to highlight. However, let me add a couple of other things. The modern army we want, the modern police we want, the modern intelligence organization we want, the modern security and border and coastal security institutions we want, they need to be I wouldn't say conditions, but educated with the new discourse, with the new vision, that the priority is to protect your citizens, as the priority is to protect your people, the priority is to protect your land and your sovereignty and your borders, and the priority is to protect, as I said earlier, your constitution and your democracy and your state institutions, irrespective of who leads those institutions. People should come and go. Institutions are permanent and they are lasting, and they are the ones that need to be protected. Let me add a couple of other things in terms of the new vision for our army. For example, there is now a change in the concept of Air Force and air war. Now, for example, using unmanned drones is the new technology, is the way forward for air forces. For our Libyan army, they need to develop at least a section or part of our air force based on unmanned drones. And we have very good strategic relationship with Turkey. Turkey is now pioneering the technology for unmanned drones, and this has to be incorporated in the new Libyan army. Another thing I would like to also add as a sub point is to do with the intelligence organizations. At the moment, our intelligence organizations are not clearly defined. Their roles are not clearly defined. Previously, we used to have external intelligence and internal intelligence. Now they just call it general intelligence or jihaz al-mukhabarat. This, if it replaces the previous external intelligence, its role has to be redefined. The role of an external intelligence organization is to actually deal with the external challenges to our country, is actually to work very closely with our foreign ministry and to be almost the shadow or the mirror image of our foreign ministry. The external intelligence organization deals with external intelligence, means gathers accurate intelligence, accurate information, helps contribute to formulating foreign policy, and helps and contribute to managing foreign policy, although the ones who will implement the foreign policy would be the foreign ministry and the government and the presidency. But the concept of external intelligence in Libya previously and now is not actually clearly defined, and it's not playing this role of dealing with the external challenges. So this is very, very important. If you compare this to other countries, even very close to us, Algeria, Morocco, and other countries, their intelligence organizations or external intelligence organizations play this crucial part by supporting their government in terms of monitoring and dealing with external challenges, and in terms of formulating and managing foreign policy. This is a new shift we need, almost like a paradigm shift we need in the way our intelligence organizations work. So these are the main, I think, 5 or 6 challenges I've highlighted. Let me just, in 1 minute, conclude by stressing again the first point I highlighted. And that is, out of all these challenges, the most important one is, even though it's 8 years late, is to formulate a vision for security in Libya, a new concept for security in Libya that takes into account that the new Libya is a totally different Libya based on a democratic discourse. That means the security vision and the security discourse has to be tailored to this democratic discourse, a vision for security that protects the citizens, most of all, protects their rights, their property, protects their human rights, and then security institutions that protect Constitution, protects democracy, and protects our natural resources and our wealth, and protects our borders and our sovereignty against any external violations. These are just the few of the challenges I believe are facing us today. Because of the time limit and the time constraints, let me just stop here, Dr. Aslan, and look forward to hearing what the others contribute as well.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. You have underlined very important topics. For instance, holistic approach. It should embrace all Libya and all Libyans. That's correct. And the idea of security, if you are talking about security, vision, conceptualization, strategy, a policy paper, it's about building a idea of security. And we should go beyond hard security issues. Well, what I mean is that, for instance, immigration, soft security threats are also a point of concern in Libyan minds. So any organization, any vision should address such kind of newly emerging security facts. And I will go to the other distinguished speaker, Salah al-Bakush, a very really precise political analyst. And I want to ask, especially from the political point of view, what the challenges are to security sector reform in Libya. We discussed many issues, many headlines, though. I want to have your ideas. Thank you.
Okay, Dr. Aslan, let me just start my timer so I can help you out with this. Thank you very much for this opportunity, and thanks to SETA for allowing us to get together here virtually and talk about a very important subject that has been ignored over the past 10 years or 9 years. Let me start by saying that the overall coercive apparatus or the security sector in Libya, within the context of a very weak state, divided society, and a profusion of non-state actors. That's the overall arcing challenge. So I will be brief and explain this in within three main challenges. The first one is the profusion of non-state actors. The profusion of non-state actors has to be talked about within the context of entire Libya. And the mistake is talking about non-state actors in the west of Libya. But I'll get to that later on when we talk about the UN and the concept of DDR and so on. But the profusion of state actors in the east and in the west has led to these actors trying to control the security sector institutions in order to control the government, to control the ministers of finance, of housing, of foreign ministry, and so on. This of course, this is the same thing was done in the east, and in the west. And now we have a government that's so weak that cannot defend itself, and thereby there can be no security sector reform when the situation is like it is now. Now, the second thing is the weak state. The weak state, we can see that since 2011, we have a succession of governments and double governments, and this led at security sector reform. It started with a program that was called Hayat al-Muharibin, or the Libyan Program for Development and Reintegration. We don't know what happened to it. It still has a website. Its news on its website is from 2016, and it spent millions of dollars, and had a database of tens of thousands of people, and nothing happened. Then came other efforts. I will push forward to for example, to now. There's an effort that Minister Namroush talked about that was headed by the Chief of Staff, based on a decision from the Commander-in-Chief, Mr. Sarraj, and they started a DDR program. Now they progressed, they did a survey and so on, and in the last few weeks, they started entering this data, and it turns out to be that we have about 5,000 or maybe 5 to 10,000 people in this. Now, the Ministry of the Interior announces on its pages that it has met with the United Nations mission and reviewed its own program for DDR, and it met with some other ambassadors, and it reviewed its own program for DDR. Now, this is really a disaster when you know that the Ministry of Interior has 2 representatives on the panel of the Chief of Staff, and everybody is working different ways. Now, the other thing is that there was an effort that Minister Namroush referred to, and I think Mr. Sagazli refers to. This was done by the Ministry of Defense and the United Nations back in 2012, and the report was issued and reviewed by Mr. Tariq Mitri, the former UNSMIL chief, in front of the security sector in April of 2013. But that was not a DDR, it was not a security sector reform effort. It was, as the report, which was called towards a white paper regarding the Libyan defense sector, it was a defense sector reform effort. But it was important, and it was very coherent in that it emphasized 2 important things. The first is that it accepted a holistic definition of the security sector reform, which is a European definition, a United Nations definition that's very expansive, very holistic. It includes the army, the security, the intelligence, and and everybody else. Secondly, excuse me. Secondly, it said that it is extremely important to include security sector reform in any peace agreement, which was never done. It was not done in Skhirat. It's not being done in Tunis now. No talk about it. That's the second challenge, the weak state, and the first challenge, as I suggested, is the profusion of non-state actors. The third challenge is the lack of international support. UNSMIL is too busy with so many things: peace negotiations, human development, development in general, talking about health sector, security, and so on. And maybe that's why the current administration in the White House, soon to be gone, thank God, suggested that maybe we should split the job of the UNSMIL chief into two things: peace negotiations and other stuff. UNSMIL has never done anything in security sector reform. Nothing, really. It talks about DDR. And its effort, the problem with its effort, is that it was always perceived to be biased because of concentration on non-state actors in the West, as if Haftar is really an army and there are no non-state actors in the South or in the East. Secondly, the UNSMIL has refused to tackle the security sector reform and make it part of any peace negotiations. Let's not forget what one of the few successful programs in security sector reform, the one that was undertaken by the Dutch in Burundi, it took 6 years. It started with insisting on security sector reform within the peace agreement in Arusha, and then when in 2000, and when 2004, when the first power sharing government was established, it was an important part of the mandate of the new government. Look at the proposed mandate of the new government to be that's being discussed in Tunis. Nothing about security sector reform. There was nothing in this Herat agreement about security sector reform. So I will conclude here, and I will wait for the other Hafid and Jum'a to add to this, and maybe you, Doctor, and thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Thank you. You have clearly summarized what had been done before in terms of security reform attempts, even though they are not perfectly security sector affiliated business, but a DDR process. But also we have to have lessons learned from these efforts. And second thing, 3 points that you have underlined are really important. Non-state actors. We usually label non-state actors as armed factions, but it's not correct. Non-state actors is beyond this definition. So I agree totally with you. And weak state structure and international support, which does not indicate any security sector reform. Only Berlin Conference had indicated SSR, security sector reform, as a issue to be dealt with pending to Cairo initiative. But I have scanned the Cairo initiative. It's, I think, 21 pages long. But we need a comprehensive one with a specific program, specific action plan, a specific ultimate goal, vision, and many other things. So I will direct my latest question to Mr. Hafid Al-Guel. He's talking us from the United States, and with a Libyan descent, he knows and he observes Libya from a different world, not inside Libya, but also from the United States. So I would like to ask you the challenges against security sector reform. If you observe it from the other side of the globe, what could be the attitude of the new U.S. administration in coming months after January 20th, and probably what about the overall international attitude? Because we know that the latest political engagement for a process is American-driven. So what could be in our agenda in the coming months and probable challenges to SSR? Thank you, sir. The floor is yours.
First of all, good morning from my time in the United States, and thank you, Dr. Murad, and it's a pleasure to be on this panel with SETA and with my two friends, Salah and Jum'a. You've heard pretty much most of the morning details about what's going on, different programs, different ideas, different initiatives, whether from the UN perspective, from the Libyan government, from various experts on security. My take is more of a political economy perspective. I think it's important to recognize, and this is not a moral judgment by any, or even a political judgment. This is, if one from the outside looks at the Libya issue, there are a number of very interesting aspects to it, and they're not unique. We've seen them in other parts of the world. I've spent most of my life at the World Bank, and we've dealt with a lot of these fragile countries and the aftermaths of various conflicts. First of all, in 2011, one of the most important or significant mistakes that the international community and also Libyans at that time who were in charge did not recognize was to actually frame the conflict of 2011 and to see it from the perspective of a civil war. Because factually, it was actually a conflict between different parts of Libya and different parts of the Libyan communities. On one level, you have those who were pro-Gaddafi, and then on the other, those who were revolting against him. It was NATO ultimately that delivered a victory for one party against the other. The reason why recognizing a civil war or seeing it as a civil war, at least to some extent, was important is because once you recognize a civil war, that triggers automatically a number of steps afterwards. Most importantly is the integration and development of the fighters. We've seen that in many parts of the world. When you don't recognize it, then these steps that you're supposed to take, like reconciliation, integration of fighters, returning back to some basic institutional, even though Libya didn't have a whole lot of institution or formal or civil or modern institutions. I mean, you can argue that tribes are an institution, but those are social and informal kind of alliances. So that was one of the most fundamental mistakes. After that, of course, and we've seen this in other parts of the world, is that it disintegrated to multiple civil wars across all kinds of demarcations, regional, tribal, ideological, in some cases even criminal gangs and so on. Once you lack a real governance framework and credible institutions in which people feel they can sort of take refuge in or go to in times of conflicts. In a place like Libya, you ended up with everybody going back to their informal alliances. So you ended up with tribes, regions, cities, even neighborhoods. That complicated, of course, the situation much further than it started in 2011. Unfortunately, talking now about security sector reform in terms of initiatives, let's get them together, let's train them, let's incorporate them in a police force or in a military force and so on, misses a very fundamental issue that's global. People move and react and act based on incentives. What is the incentive for a young Libyan who has been using arms to extract some kind of rent to live, to make money one way or another from the government, or by extortion, or by all kinds of illicit activities. What is the incentive for them now to go back to legal or some kind of a formal framework? There is nothing on the ground politically or economically that has changed. Things got even worse. So telling them that I'll get you back into or integrate you in the police force and give you a salary doesn't really necessarily incentivize them to do much. They're making probably much more now. They're much freer. They feel they belong into whatever group they are in. So the thinking itself about how to establish some kind of a formal, or at least a minimum sense of security across the country needs to take into its account incentives, the incentive mix you are working with. In other parts of the world, we've used different techniques, usually economic, to try to disarm some of these groups, giving them, for example, money to buy the arms they have, and structuring it in such a way that the incentive increases for them to give their arms rather than reduce. For example, I'll give you a very concrete example. You could come to these young people and give them a certain amount of money that is much higher than even the market price for their weapons. And you structure it in such a way that if you don't do it now, then in 30 days, the price will go down. Another 30 days, we will not pay you anything. The only thing you will get out of this is that you will not be labeled as a criminal that is wanted by the law. So you can do a number of these things. The second point, which I think Mustafa mentioned, and it needs to be expanded on, is that not all of these guys want to be in security. They don't want to be police. They don't want to be an army. So you have to introduce another incentive to them. Scholarships, interest-free loans to start their businesses, training programs with international certification, which they feel that then that will give them a leg up. All of these things have to be a part of the overall picture, but it all goes back into the incentive. Most fundamentally, I think, is the issue of reconciliation. You have now still tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of Libyans who are afraid to go back to Libya. A big chunk of them is for political reasons. Some of them are leftovers from the Gaddafi regime. Others are because of the conflict or the sort of the various groups they belong to now. Others because they want to secure their families and so on. There is no institutions in the country that can protect them. And therefore, you need to have some kind of a social reconciliation. Every country that, after a civil war of some sort or a civil conflict, did not engage in reconciliation and incorporating even those from the former regimes into their future. So you basically are telling them, okay, the past is the past. However, let's start from here. At least we can have a common understanding for the future, making them feel they have a stake in the future of the country, instead of taking a defensive position and starting to undermine any effort because they just don't belong into it, or they feel they don't belong into it. They feel they're being, there is a revenge cycle that is going in. So I see that my time is almost up. I wanted to go to other issues, but anyway, the bottom line is, I think the two fundamental things that need to be paid attention to reconciliation and the incentives. On just very 30 seconds, Murad, just so not to ignore your question about the new administration, I think you will see a return to the Barack Obama foreign policy in general, and also when it comes to Libya. I think you're going to see an active support from the United States to the United Nations process rather than anything else. I think the United States will also go back to the Barack Obama approach to never allow a conflict, a military aggression, like what happened with Haftar last year, because Haftar wanted to do it in 2016. He actually discussed it with the US administration at that time, and they gave him a very clear warning not to do it. Then, of course, after Trump took over, you know, that red line was removed. So I think you're going to see a return to that. I think this administration will also not shy away from being strong when it comes to its allies that have been instrumental in creating war and conflict in Libya, like the UAE, for example. Trump never wanted to talk to the UAE or stop them. I think this administration will do exactly what Barack Obama did, which is to make sure that they do not interfere militarily in Libya. So there are a number of things, but overall, I think it's now conducive to trying to come to some kind of a peaceful solution. I think there will be also, they will try to build on what Turkey actually achieved in Libya, which is we will not be talking about peaceful negotiations or dialogues or any of that stuff today if it wasn't for Turkey that defended the city of Tripoli and forced Haftar to return militarily. With, you know, nobody was begging him, they forced him to go back. And that delivered them the message that if you want to get anywhere, you have to sit down and come to terms to this. Thank you. I'm sorry I took too long.
So a very clear picture, actually, because political economy aspect of assessing security sector reform is really important that we can't ignore, because once a conflict becomes an economy, but especially institutionalized economy, then you can't revert, you know, the developments to the other side. That means democratization, for instance, or stability, because the ones who increase in numbers profiting this conflict will try to sustain it for their benefits. Sir, thank you. So I have questions, one question per each. And I think 4 minutes is enough for every speaker because we don't have time. The first question goes to Jumail Gamati. Sir, as you know, we will have an election. We expect it in 13 months. And we have political parties, and you are leading a political party in Libya, and there will be promises in terms of providing security. So my question is as such kind of promises from different political parties will transform, you know, security after the elections. So how do you expect it? What type of promises do you expect, and what type of effect to security sector after the elections?
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Aslan, for that question. Let me address it by perhaps, again, putting on my academic hat and say that everything needs to start from a vision. And then once a vision is developed and crafted, this vision needs to be formulated into a strategy. And then strategies need to be implemented. They need to go to implementation stage. So, but however, for implementation, what we need is good, efficient, competent political leaders to deliver this implementation. I say it with sorrow that unfortunately, over the last 10 years, mostly this has been lacking. I don't want to condemn everybody who took position over the last 10 years, but I think the overwhelming and the majority lacked the skill, the political skill, and the competency and the efficiency to actually develop visions or even to take visions, subscribe to them, and then convert them into strategies and good implementation on the ground. I give you one example of a man who I respect a lot, and that is the ex-chief of staff, Yusuf Mangoush. I met him in 2013. I sat with him for 2.5 hours. He outlined to me a very clear, detailed, visionary strategy for reforming the armed forces and the army, especially the army. Unfortunately, he was obstructed. He was not allowed to carry out and implement this strategy. This is what I mean by having the skilled leaders and the politicians. The other important component which political parties or whoever takes up position after the next elections need to actually think about seriously, in addition to visions and strategies and implementation, is something which my dear friend Hafid alluded to in detail, and that is incentives and incentivizing. I think it's very, very important to incentivize large segments of the Libyan society to actually buy into and subscribe to a common vision and a common future for Libya that incorporates all Libyans in an atmosphere and an environment of national reconciliation. Therefore, incentivizing young men to actually join the security organizations, incentivizing them to actually see that this is a good career for them, a good future for them, giving them the best human capacity possible, the best training, the best education, and also equipping them with the latest knowledge and technology that is available around in the world. I think incentives and incentivizing is also a crucial element. However, all this will only be theoretical if the next elections are not actually protected in all over Libya, not just in the west, in the east and in the south, that there are guarantees that there will be the security environment and the secure environment whereby campaigning for elections, standing for elections, and carrying out elections is actually guaranteed without any interference, to guarantee that these elections are transparent and fair. And obviously the other thing is to respect the outcome and the results of these elections. And the other thing after that is not to carry on with this squabbling over positions and taking shares of power and this regionalization. The South wants this number of ministries, the East wants this number of ministries, the West wants this number, this tribe wants this ministry. This culture is poisonous. It will never allow for building a modern state based on rule of law and citizenship. Therefore, I hope there is a shift, a shift in mindset, a paradigm shift in the way people and political parties and those who will be elected in the new parliament approach taking positions and taking power and also managing power. Power should be seen as a privilege to serve your people. And then if you don't serve them well, you should move back and take a back step and allow others who are better. And by the way, let me just, one final thing. I think everything we talked about today, I was also inspired by your book, Dr. Aslan. I think this book is a fantastic book, Security Sector Reform for Libya. What does it say? It says it's a crucial step towards state building. So that keeps things in perspective. Security sector reform is only a part of the jigsaw. It's part of the overall state building that we all aspire to and wish for. And I know the overwhelming majority of people have good hearts and they have the right attitude to actually achieve this goal. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. And second question is for Mr. Al-Bakush. You summarized the course, international efforts and previous attempts. But my question is about integrating national level and international levels in terms of not only state building, but also, state building and security sector reform. Under what ground and what type of affiliation we can, integrate national and international efforts? Because I know that security sector is a national issue, but you can benefit from the experiences of the international actors. So to what limit and what time?
Well, definitely not the way we are trying to reach a government, a unity government in Tunis. This is definitely not going to work with the international community. Over the past 9 years, I participated in meetings with heads of governments, with foreign ministers and defense ministers and so on. And the complaint was always, we don't have anybody to talk to that has credibility and that can tell us something, and then we can take it to the bank. Oh yes, we'll do this, and we started this, and we developed this, and we have plans for this, and nothing happens. But this is not unusual, as my friends here, Hafid and Jum'a, can attest to. This is the way Libya works. Very, very, very slow. So a major condition for this cooperation to occur, which is very crucial, is that to have a credible government. But for example, now in Tunis, it's being divvied up with, okay, the head of the presidential council is for the East, and you can choose whoever you want. And the head of the central bank is for such and such a group, and so on. So this is not going to be a coherent government when the prime minister, for example, has probably a different view, completely different view of what needs to be done and who's the enemy and who's the friend, then the presidential council. I mean, how can you cooperate with the international community? So this is a problem. I think the answer, the short answer, is that we need elections so all these bodies can fall and we have one elected assembly that can form a government that's coherent, that's cohesive, that has a plan. But without that, we're going to continue the way we've done over the past few years. One final point about something that both my friends Hafid and Jum'a brought about the incentivizing the combatant armed groups, non-state actors, whatever we want to call them, about the economics and so on. First of all, I would like all of us to concentrate on the security sector reform within which a DDR should work. But other than economic incentives, you have to have a coercive ability, and that doesn't come without forming or developing a security sector, a defense sector. I mean, okay, you don't want the carrot, the economic incentive. Well, we have a stick, but there is no stick. Not only there is no stick, I mean, they will tell you, and you can't argue with that. Well, if it wasn't for us, who would have defended Tripoli? Go develop an army to defend the country, and then come talk to me. So here you go about incentives. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. And final question. You talked about the U.S. policy, probable, expectations for the coming months. But I want to delve a bit more on that, because if you go through the history of the Libyan conflict after the attack of Haftar to GNA, targeting GNA, and to try to capture Tripoli, actually, now we have countries supporting Haftar, and also Turkey and Qatar supporting GNA. Well, after the U.S. handover of authority to Biden administration, not officially announced yet, on the other hand, okay, there are some allies of the United States like France, UAE, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and Jordan. And these states directly provided support to Haftar. And the attitude of the U.S. politicians after January seems to be a bit different regarding Libya, as you said. So the question is if the United States will be able to balance such kind of attempts, if and also if there is no political solution. I mean, if the political attempts collapse.
I think you have to look at the United States policy on a regional aspect, not Libya. Libya was never a focal point for any American administration, never. Even when they had Air Force bases in Libya, they were more than happy to get out without any problems. The oil, they boycotted the Libyan oil for close to 25 years. It didn't affect anything. So Libya's significance to the United States is on a regional basis. It is a part of three basic regions that are important for the United States: the Mediterranean, North Africa, and the Sahel countries of Chad and Mali and Niger. So from that perspective, yes, the United States would like to have a peaceful Libya. Yes, the United States would like to have a democratic Libya. Yes, the United States would like to end any conflicts in Libya. All of that. I mean, that's just normal. Reality is probably Libya will never be that way. Even if you have elections, they're going to still divvy up the country based on tribes and all kinds of things, as we've seen in the last 2 years. The United States also is always very careful about the issue of just doing elections, because they ended up with a much worse situation, security situation and civil war in Iraq, for example, not before the election, but right after it, because that's when conflicts break out. So, but from a U.S. perspective, as you mentioned, Murad, it has a lot of friends. All have their fingers in the Libyan pie. France, Italy, Turkey, even Greece, Egypt, Jordan, Saudi, Emirates, all of these are friends and allies. So the American approach will have to be, how do I balance this? And I think the United States has a lot of tools that it can use. The difference is the old administration, Trump administration, and by the way, it is official that Biden won, did not want to use these tools to reach a solution. That he used the United States pulpit to support countries that he was almost, I don't want to be impolite, but he was completely under their mercy or their, patronage, like specifically the Emirates as a principal one, and then Saudi Arabia as well. He basically just wanted to do whatever they told him would do. I mean, even his call to Haftar was not really an official U.S. policy or thought of through by his advisors. It was simply because Mohammed bin Zayed asked him to call Haftar and convinced him that Haftar is going to be the next head of Libya, so there's no point in not reaching out to him. But I think the Biden administration, and now we have some sense of who will be serving in the national security and state structure in the new administration for the Middle East, for the North Africa and the Middle East dimension. Most of them are from the time of Barack Obama. So I think the most probably likely, as I said earlier, is you're going to get into a return to that policy, to Obama's period. But I am not talking about just Libya, as I'm talking about the whole region. And the United States will see Libya as one part of this. But U.S. interests in Libya are very different from Libyan interest in Libya. I mean, people would like to have the United States come in and get involved. Trust me, United States involvement is not always a good thing. It can actually make things far worse. So, and the United States has very specific interests in Libya, as I told you, that are regional, like fighting terrorism. That's a regional issue. It does not want conflict in these regions of the world, especially now with the Eastern Mediterranean as well. It does not want Russian and Chinese influence close to the European sphere of influence. So all of the US interests have nothing to do with what goes on inside Libya. I mean, as far as US politicians or there is no, again, no incentive for them to get involved in Libya. Everybody who got involved in Libya got burned by it. I mean, now you have the book of Barack Obama in which he speaks that he was simply basically tricked by Sarkozy and David Cameron into getting involved. At one point, he called it his worst mistake. Then you came into the killing of a US ambassador, which froze everything in Washington. I can tell you, people don't realize the significance of having a US ambassador or even US citizens getting killed in a place. It makes it impossible for anybody here in Washington to move. The cost of doing the wrong thing is far worse. So all of these elements have to be thought through. But I think at the end, the United States, the best thing Libyans can count on the United States to do is if they come up with a real framework of how they want to run their country, then you can get Americans to help you and stand by you, but not the other way around.
Okay. Sir, thank you. Very brief. So as concluding remark, everybody agrees that there must be a reformation for security sector, but not only about hard security, but security of all brands. So that will be the last sentence of this panel. I appreciate your participation. You just dedicated your time for us from the United States, from Turkey. So thank you so much. And I wish a great day and a great time for you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.